Okay, I think we can start now. Thank you and welcome to our webinar on growing green initiatives, how to plan for a sustainable NGO. My name is Enikő Vas. I'm the Content and Communication Manager at Terre des Hommes Partnership and Localization Project, Local Link Hub, and I will be today's Masters of Ceremony. Okay, please, the next slide. Local Link Hub is an online resource platform in 9 languages. These languages are Albanian, Arabic, Bengali, French, Hungarian, Hindi, Nepali, Ukrainian, and English. And my colleague needs to find out how to move the slides a bit, but I will just keep on telling that Local Link Hub, thank you. It's working. Thank you so much. At Local Link Hub, we support our local partners and local NGOs as well, where you can grow, communicate, and connect. You can jump to the next slide, please. How local organizations can grow by taking our curated e-learnings we develop wide. We have a lot of different topics covered. This is communication, fundraising, CFRM, and even environmental sustainability. We will provide you the link to these e-learnings so you don't have to memorize all these names. At our site, we also publish news about local organizations. So if you have some milestones to celebrate, please share this news with us, and we will make it sure that this news is shared on a wider scale. We also publish curated grants every Friday. This is something new so please do check on Friday the grants menu on Local Link Hub, because we are providing the most important grants for local organizations for sure. How can you connect? You can follow us on social media. You can subscribe to the newsletter. You can register on our site as partners, and this will give you access to the membership directory as well as e-learnings. And this is the right slide that we have here, the housekeeping announcements. I would like to share this knowledge with you. As you know, the language of the webinar is English. The event is recorded, and everything will be made available after the webinar along with the presentation slides. The chat window is open, so please write down your comments and questions there. And for those who came a bit later, please put down in the chat your name, your organization, and say hello in your language just to, warm up a little bit. If you have questions during the presentations, please put them in the Q&A section. And this is not just to annoy you, we are seeing better the questions in the Q&A section, and we cannot really scroll between the chats. So please put them, the questions in the Q&A section. First, the speakers will present their topics. We have reserved some time at the end of the webinar for the questions, and we will try to answer all your inquiries. If any chance we do not have enough time for every question, we will answer them in writing, and we will send you after the event. Automated live captioning in English is available. You can turn it on using Zoom's functionality at the bottom of the screen. At the end of our event, we will share a short survey about the webinar. This is really short. We have only 3 questions. Please fill this out because it helps us create better webinars. Okay, so next slide, please. Today's webinar is the second of 3 events that are designed to promote the various e-learnings that we have up on our website. These e-learnings were developed by Terre des Hommes with the help of Local Link Hub. Our first webinar was on 4th of February, and it was about social media essentials. We have today the second webinar, and the third webinar will be on April 3rd, and we will talk about institutional fundraising. We will share this invitation with the people who registered for this webinar after the event. Okay, so the topic of today's webinar is growing green initiatives, how to plan for a sustainable NGO. Please. We designed this webinar as part of the broader environmental e-learning, and we have developed it with the help of Louis Malheur, climate advisor at Terre des Hommes. He is one of the speakers today. This course has 4 modules and helps NGOs learn about the basic notions of environmental sustainability for local civil organizations. At the end of the course, we provide a certificate of completion. So please, speakers, please turn on your cameras now and let's show your faces to our audience here. We have 4 distinguished speakers today. Thank you very much for accepting our invitation, and thank you for being part of this webinar. So our first speaker will be Nishani Yayamaha. She is the coordinator at the Secretariat of the Climate and Environment Charter for Humanitarian Organizations. Second speaker is Zaninha Nagundir. She is project manager, Climate Action Accelerator. Third speaker, I already mentioned Louis Malheur. He is our climate and environment advisor at Terre des Hommes. And fourth, very special guest from Project Development Society is Deep Purkayastha. Project is a partner organization of Local Link Hub for India. So thank you, speakers, and now please switch off your cameras, but Nishani, because Nishani is going to be our first speaker, and I will present a bit her. She has more than 20 years of experience across the UN, international organizations, government NGOs, and the private sector. Her expertise spans disaster management, humanitarian response, protection, access negotiation, gender, civic space learning, and of course, climate change. She began her humanitarian career in Sri Lanka after the Indian Ocean tsunami and has worked at country, regional, and HQ levels on policy and practice. She has held roles with UN OCHA, the World Humanitarian Summit, the Grand Bargain Secretariats, PHAP, and most recently as Climate and Learning at ICWA. So, Nishani, the floor is yours.
Thanks so much, Aninko, and thanks a lot for having me on this webinar. Really important topic that we're going to discuss and deal with. We're at a point actually right now in the system that looking at climate change and environment sustainability is even more important, noting that, of course, we're going through quite a lot of upheaval in the humanitarian sector. And I would like to maybe start on our first slide for the webinar that we, to guide everybody through. For those who don't know the Climate and Environment Charter, it's the charter that has been developed by the sector for the sector to provide as a framework. for humanitarian organizations to take into consideration environment sustainability, resilience building, looking at communities that will to build their resilience, and how we as organizations also looking at building our own resilience and looking at our own environment sustainability in the work we do as NGOs, civil society, Red Cross, across the board. And we're no stranger to risks, shocks, and crises, because we've been now seeing how severe climate impacts such as droughts, heat waves, floods, cyclones, and are also leading to desertification. And this is becoming a challenge that we're all facing in how are we going to respond to these crises in a more systematic and organized, right? How do we become more effective is always the question. And while everyone, and that is something we need to remember, while everyone is affected by the climate crisis and by the climate impacts, not everyone is affected equally. And this is where the importance of how are we supporting and building resilience and looking at communities and local actors and local action on the ground is important. So if we go on to the next slide, just as a background of the charter, it is as organizations basically working in conflict, complex emergency, fragile context, there was a realization that we as organizations need to step up our own response and help people adapt to the impacts of climate and environment crisis. The charter stems from the recognition that we as a sector need to act collectively and that we have a responsibility, not only to respond to the consequences that are part of this crisis, but also as a responsibility to reduce our environmental impact of our actions. Like the Code of Conduct, many of you are likely aware of the Code of Conduct. The Charter represents a sector's commitment to do our part and together so that our own actions reduce the impacts of the crisis. This isn't just a pledge. The charter has been written, as I mentioned before, by humanitarians for the humanitarian community. It serves as a collective commitment to step up and address these issues that we're seeing. And simply without significant investment in climate change adaptation, resilience building of communities and local action, and of course, noting the drastic reduction of greenhouse gas emissions and our environment footprint, human organizations will not be able to respond adequately to the rising needs. Next slide will show you that we have just over 2 years. So the charter was launched rather in May 2021, but we have, as Secretariat, started the charter only last year in May. So it's been not too long. We're not even a year yet. As a charter secretary, there's two of us, my colleague Natasha Westheimer and myself. We have over 460 signatories to the Charter and 13 EU and member states supporters to the Charter. I'm not going to go through the details of who they are, but over half of the Charter signatories are NGOs, and many of you here, including Terra Homes and Climate Action Accelerator and others I see on the chat, are signatories to the Charter. Interestingly, over 60% of Charter signatories are local, national, regional, and country-based organizations who are very much rooted with communities, working on the ground on some of climate and environmental action in the context that we're working in. So if we go on to the next slide, I'd like to share with you what these commitments of the Charter are and why it's important to have as a framework. And one of the things we found when we were developing the Charter and the Charter came about was that there was a lack of real focus at the beginning. And now there's very much more, focus on environment action in the humanitarian sector. But before, there was a lack of framework. And the 7 commitments acts as a guide and a framework for organizations to look at how we're working on both humanitarian and climate action. So if we look at the commitments, first commitment, reducing risk and vulnerabilities and increase focus on climate change adaptation. And the second commitment is the do no harm principle, the do more good, is also looking at not just reducing our greenhouse gas emissions. And if I go on to the next slide, you will see that a bit more clearly. You move on to the next slide, please. Yes, these are the backbones of the charter. And if we can, many organizations come to us and say, oh, we're talking about life-saving assistance, we're talking about community resilience building, but is it important to look at our environment footprint? I mean, is this something that we need to be concentrating on? And if we don't have both of this, how is it that we're going to improve? And this is one of the things that we've been promoting, is that you need to have both. Building the resilience of the communities, looking at the disaster risk reduction, adaptation, early warning, early action, at the same time looking at our own, how are we supporting these communities to be more environmentally sustainable? How are we more environmentally sustainable on the ground? And at local action, we see that there's already a lot happening, but how can it be mainstreamed in a more sustainable way and a long-term way, right? And this is not just about greenhouse gas emissions or CO2 emissions. It's all about looking at nature-based solutions, looking at conservation, things that we as many humanitarian organizations are not really good at, while development organizations who are multi-mandated are really taking a lot more focus on that, or getting to focus more on that. And if you look at the commitments, number 3, and if we go on to the next slide, you'll see that commitment number 3 is the first commitment of how do we actually look at community resilience building, organizations resilience building, and how are we looking at our own environment sustainability and ecosystem support to communities that we're working with, that embracing the leadership of local actors and communities is actually central, and it cuts across all the other commitments are there. It recognizes local capacities and resources, who are people on the first responders on the ground, right? In Sri Lanka, when the tsunami happens or during a conflict, the first people there are our communities, your neighbors, your next villagers, your next surrounding communities who will respond to either a disaster and will volunteer and be there. We saw that local action is not just about NGOs only or civil society. It's also about local authorities. It's about disaster management actors. It's about the private sector. All this is an ecosystem as well that we really need to look at in a more holistic manner when looking at local action. And strengthening communities to be more resilient is now more crucial than ever. So planning, including different communities, be they refugees or host communities in planning preparedness and our programs, is crucial in order to make those programs not only part of the ownership piece, but also meaningful on the ground. And looking at the local solutions that we're seeing, be it on greening or be it on resilience building, the local host and indigenous community knowledge is extremely important. We are not very good at doing this, especially if we're looking at the commitment number 4. We're looking at climate risk. There's a lot of knowledge or environment risk that has been there in the past. Are we tapping into this when we are going in to design our programs, talking to elder population who have passed down so much of knowledge on the ground? Are we looking at collaboration across the communities and local actors? These are some of the things that we need to look into in order to ensure that we're bringing together the local action, local knowledge, and how as a sector, be it humanitarian development, peace building, we need to work across these sectors in order to make sure that local action is actually strengthened. And then obviously the advocacy piece that we need to do to promote local voices, ensure those local voices are at the table, or else they're always going to have more, voices from different aspects, but not really from those who are actually impacted by climate change and environmental crises that we're seeing right now. I'm going to stop now. There's quite points that we want to take on, but that can come in afterwards during the Q&A, I think. Thank you. You're on mute, I think.
Yes, sorry, thank you so much. So thank you, Nishani, so much for your presentation. We will share the slides with you for sure at the end of this webinar. And you can always read these, and at the Q&A section, yes, we will have more a chance to speak about these topics. Can you please advance the slides a bit? Because, yes, okay, so we had just one slide left. That's really okay. Now, Zaninha Nagunjir is our second speaker. Please, Zaninha, switch on your camera now. Okay. Zaninha, she is project manager at Climate Action Accelerator. She supports transversal projects and partnerships at the Climate Action Accelerator and is leading the development of the support program for national actors. She previously worked as a researcher on a youth and permaculture project in Guinea with the National Trade Center and collaborated with the Rwanda Environment Management Authority on research on the history of plastics in the country. She holds a master's degree in development from the Geneva Graduate Institute, specializing in environment and sustainability. So Zaninha, you are the speaker now. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. I'm happy to be here to introduce the Climate Action Accelerator for those who may not know, and then say a little bit about what we're doing, especially with regards to national action. I think we can already go on the next slide. So who are we? Just a few words on the accelerator. So we're a nonprofit initiative based in Geneva that was created a little bit over 4 years ago. And really the object is to operationalize climate commitment. So kind of taking up or taking forward from what Nishani was mentioning, where the sector over the years has been really engaging and pledging and taking commitments over the years, actually over quite a few years now. The idea is how can we support organizations and then operationalizing this commitment. So really empowering organizations with solutions and kind of a one-stop center where they can go from pledges and commitments to roadmaps and action plans and measuring and implementing these solutions. So really to bring together as many organizations as possible that are implementing and scaling up solutions in this sector in order to create a domino effect and kind of, add their own contribution to reducing global emissions and keeping temperature increase to 2 degrees, although of course, as we all know, this is becoming harder and harder. We really work around 3 specific sectors: international aid sector, as I mentioned, covering both international and national and local organizations; the health sector, really through I'd say organic development between international medical humanitarian into just organizations as well. And then we also are working and getting more and more organizations around the higher education and research sector. I believe these 3 sectors were chosen because of their specific amplification potential, their specific, part they play in society, and also the part that they play in global emissions, and how you can bring these 3 sectors to learn together, act together, and potentially have an impact as well on the real economy. So yeah, really our objectives are to empower organizations to have their emissions, strengthen their resilience, champion them to become actors of change in their networks, influencing their peers, and then building a community of action, a community of practice around that, of organizations that are really walking the talk. If you go to the next slide, today we have about 34, 35 partners on board. This is really across the sector, from large international organizations to medium-sized medical humanitarian organizations to also local actors that also are between small and medium organizations, but that are really coming together to implement and really tackle this question and then learn together as well what that looks like, as well as benefit from the solutions each of them create to really create an active community of practice. On the next slide, I think for the rest of the presentation, I'll really talk about specifically what we're doing with national partners and national actors in Africa. We started kind of, as I mentioned, but I should mention that for context, the accelerator was first accompanying international humanitarian organizations like the ICRC and MSF and the initial partners of the accelerator, to really operationalize the commitments they had taken to halve their emissions. And then very naturally, we developed, I'd say, a program to support the partners of our partners. So how do you go from international organizations that are creating roadmaps and action plans and measuring their emissions to reduce their emissions? Then how do you then potentially influence the partners with which they work, who are also interested in tackling this question, interested in looking at what that looks like in their own operations on the ground, that are, witnesses to climate change every day, everything that Nishani mentioned before, that also want to increase the resilience of their action, especially as we see the future of humanitarian action becoming more and more localized. So we developed a tailored program that really more looks at how can these organizations develop in a low carbon and resilient manner. So how can they imagine and project the future of their operations, but decoupling that from their emissions? How could they be more resilient in terms of energy, more resilient in terms as well as with volatile prices, volatile material? I mean, I can't mention the context enough. So how can these organizations project responding more and more to growing needs, but in a way that remains within planetary boundaries and remains within a respect of their local environment? So today we have about 13 local partners on board of the initiative. Here you can just see the names and the logos of our partners. I think on the next slide I'll mention a little bit kind of what sectors and what we do together, and then later we can see what those organizations themselves are doing. So in this adapted program that we developed with our partners, we have very clear, let's say, objectives that we do with the rest of our partners that we accompany. There is really an objective to co-construct a roadmap with our partners. So each of them come out of the partnership or the first section of the partnership with their own roadmap of how, in the specific work that they see climate adaptation, resilience being integrated into their work. We do work on measuring and monitoring both carbon and waste. So there's a simplified method of seeing, okay, as a X-sized organization, what is the profile of our emissions, just to understand, where the hot spots could be, where the, let's say, potential growth of emissions could be, but really from an understanding perspective, and then looking at waste monitoring, tackling this pollution question and seeing how does each organization contribute to the waste production that's happening in their communities, whether that's in their offices or in their projects. So we have quantified approach as well. And then I'd say the other elements are really about how do we accelerate and reinforce the projects that these organizations have already in place, because most of the time that is the case. Either these are clearly earmarked as environmental or climate projects, sometimes not, but they exist and need to be more, maybe sometimes, what's the word I'm looking for, amplified. They need to be maybe measured and monitored so that the results can be shown. So how do we support our organizations in that? And then we have also quite important part around better access to climate funds, better access to climate and health funds, and how do we create those connections between these local organizations and the larger movement of climate finance, which is the big black box, and then how in general do they influence their own peers and their own networks and their communities, and how do we include them in this larger global community of knowledge and community of sharing and practice that the accelerator has. So really having south north south, not to use those terms specifically, but how do we really make sure that there's learning happening all across the sector? And on the next slide, we'll see kind of how these stations are accompanied throughout sometimes 9 to 12 months process. So we put them what we call collective cycles, which we put organizations that are similar together and that are based around the same place and go through our capacity building process, where the accelerator organizes workshops and measures and analyzes their data and helps them develop their roadmap. So it goes from a state of affairs process to, choosing their own thematic priority solutions based on what they do, what's relevant in their context, building this roadmap that has commitment and a structure and means and time horizons and key commitments. And then the specific part about, okay, how do we now deploy and finance stations? What are the challenges? What are the opportunities? And then once these roadmaps validated and the data analysis has been made and the organization has gotten to a point where they have a roadmap that they're to validate and endorse, then we publish them, and then we have webinars or presentations and different events where they've been able to showcase their roadmaps and share them and share them as well in their countries with the different partners that they have. So that's kind of a methodology and what we do together with the 13 partners that we have. Today, we're in our second collective cycle. We completed one in 2023, in 2024 mid-year, and started another one before the end of last year. And so really this adapted program that we developed to put together national and local organizations that are really thinking about this question, wanting to tackle it directly, wanting to understand how in our own work within we see in our communities, how can we increase the climate resilience of our health programming? How can we increase the climate resilience of our different education or child protection projects? How do we imagine what we do in this better around the different sectoral commitments? And on the next slide, I think I really wanted to just maybe go into a few specific examples of what our partners do. So this is just an idea to give you the scope of activities that our partners work on. So these are really like medium to small organizations that are working on maternal child health, that are sometimes in general on public health issues, malnutrition, that have really responded to specific needs in their community. So for example, prisons or jails that are looking at care for displaced persons, that sometimes are education, entering into employability depending on the need of their communities, some depending on their base prevention and border cooperation. So really working around a wide array of issues, but that still see a need and a relevance of tackling climate in that. And on the next slide, we'll just look quickly at a few examples of the projects and the actions that some of our partners are putting in place, some that they put in place after working on the roadmap with us, some that they had already before. So Alerte Santé, which is a medical humanitarian organization based in Chad, had been with that works a lot around nomadic and pastoralist communities, noticing that communities are consistently unprepared when the climate has completely shifted the way they were used to doing agriculture, and noticing that the impact on health as well they were unaware of. So they developed this project with local radio stations in local languages to disseminate weather and climate information to moving populations in different languages for them to know better, what are the provisions and predictions in terms of climate, and what can be the impact on your harvests and what can be the impacts on health. That's one example. For example, SOS Médecins, who is based in Burkina Faso, that works on providing healthcare in prisons, and some people just maybe the word is not prison, like detention centers for youth, saw that there was always these huge plots of land in these centers that were already used for agriculture, but not at all any kind of ecological framework, developed a project where they used that existing land with the agreement of the prison authorities or the center authorities to use that land to teach agroecological practices to the inmates, to the young detainees, and use that as an opportunity for them to have skills that they can use once they are able to be reintegrated into society, because all of the young detainees have a project that they work on during that period of time. They added agroecology as one, which was able to improve inmate nutrition, regenerate the soil, and give them a potential income generating activity on the outside that is integrated with climate. I don't know how much more time I have. I don't know if I can kind of detail the last two, or if we can anyways share the slides, and on our website we share kind of the different case studies and best practices that our partners are implementing. But really this shows that, as Michelle was mentioning as well, that these activities are already going on with many local and national NGOs, that really what the accelerator wants to do is come in and help them put a framework around what they're doing, allow them to be able to present it in a way that showcases how it contributes to a sectoral movement, and then help them better monitor, measure, present, and reach a kind of bigger platform. And I think on the next slide, I just have a few information about the accelerator for those that are interesting. And maybe I'll mention this quickly. And I think it may be a good segue for Louis as well. And we've been talking a lot with Tabitha about how do we create this collective cycle also for some of the Asian partners of the Fondation. And that's something that we're looking and trying to progress to see how we can also imagine this collective in a different region with Tabitha as a partner. But I think we'll be able to share that once it's more concrete. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Zaninha. It's really, really interesting. And the projects that you mentioned, it's really eye-opening how technology and how, just quick thinking can help with the climate and with everything that you are working. So thank you, really interesting presentation. So Louis Moller, please, yes, your camera. Sorry, so our third speaker is our in-house expert, Louis Moller from Terre des Hommes. He is a climate advisor, and he is a professional with a strong background in addressing climate change and environmental issues. He is passionate about promoting green technologies and strategies that help mitigate climate change, particularly in the areas of energy efficiency and low carbon solutions. He is also the author of the Environmental Sustainability in Aid Organizations e-learning, which is available for free on Local Link Hub. And if you are taking it, we can give you a certificate of completion. So please, Louis, the floor is yours.
Thanks a lot, Eniko. Thanks. Hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Very happy to be here with you today. So I would like to share with you kind of the journey my organization embarked on almost 4 years ago now to integrate environmental sustainability into our operations. So just a few words about maybe the origin. So yeah, this initiative, this approach did not originate from the boardroom. It was really like it really started with our colleagues in the field. They were the ones who witnessed firsthand the devastating impact of climate change on children and young people we support. So their voices also combined with a leadership team at that time that recognized the urgency of acting. All that set up the stage, I would say, for this institutional shift that was initiated in 2021. Of course, it's also, I think, important to state from the beginning that change is never easy, as you know, probably in your own organizations. So transforming an entire institution is a great challenge. And of course, we encounter also at Terre des Hommes, of course, many setbacks. And that's also why I wanted to just make one thing clear also from the beginning. So I'm not here to prescribe, a one-size-fits-all model. But instead, I just want to share like our approach, our successes, but also failures, and also the lessons learned along the way. And I think most importantly, as I look forward to learning from all the participants, we already heard many interesting points from the other panelists, and I also hope to continue the conversation with you all, even after the webinar. Actually, within this community, I would say gravitating around Local Link Hub. And this comes to shared learning and to sharing best practices is also why we developed this online training modules on environmental sustainability for aid organization. So it's designed to be a practical resource for any organization seeking to take action. But we are also ourselves, of course, learning. So I would be very interested and happy to also hear some from you. If you take the course, like really feel free to tell us what you think about the course, also to suggest some revision. It's not something that is fixed. We can always like revise the module, and if you have input to add, really it would be really welcome. So that being said, I'll start the content, like the core content of the presentation. So our approach, how do we want to mainstream environmental sustainability into our organization? So I would say that we have structured our strategy around three interconnected pillars that you can see on the slide. So first, it's about reducing our environmental impact, so mitigation of the carbon footprint, and also limitation of the local and environmental degradation. Second pillar is about adapting our programs. So how can we strengthen climate resilience in the communities we support, with a strong focus, of course, on children and youth as its core mandate. And third pillar is about advocating for climate action, and also with the strong focus on the promotion of children's right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment. So for today's presentation, I will focus mainly on the first pillar, mitigation, which is also the focus of our online training modules. So mitigation. So to start, we set an ambitious target, 50% reduction in emissions by 2030. So to achieve this, in 2021, we started the partnerships with the partnership with the Climate Action Accelerator to guide us through this process. And in 2022, we also reinforced, I would say, this commitment by signing the Climate and Environment Charter for Humanitarian Organizations. Importantly, we have also started to see this commitment as an extension of the do no harm principle to ensure that our interventions do not contribute to local and global environmental degradation. Next slide, please. Great. So the second step, after committing to a specific objective, the second step is to take stock, I would say, of the situation, and measuring our impact. So that's what we did in 2021 with our first carbon footprint assessment. So the results that you can see here on the slide were quite revealing. It allowed us, to highlight the biggest sources of emission for our organization. And also it allowed us to use those results to develop our action plan. Next slide, please. So just also wanted to outline that, as you can imagine, this was not a simple task. So it required a lot of collaboration across all levels of the organization. And I think it's an important point to keep in mind. I mean, assessing a carbon footprint is a quite complex exercise, but I think it's worth for two reasons. So of course, again, then you can use those results to then develop an action plan. But I also think it makes sense kind of in itself, if I can say, because like it's also a good way to raise awareness internally, you know, like you are asking a lot from different colleagues, you are asking them to collect data, it takes some time, it takes some energy, and you have to justify it in a way, you know, so to explain the logic behind this exercise and behind the approach. So that it's also a good way to raise awareness internally. And of course, just to finish on the carbon footprint, there are multiple tools out there available for calculating the emission. Some are specifically designed for the humanitarian sector. And if you are interested, you can have a look at our third module in the online training, in which we provide some examples of these tools. It's not an exhaustive overview, you know, like there are a lot of different things out there, but it can be a good starting point. Next slide, please. So again, like once based on our carbon assessment, I would say we then developed our climate mitigation plan, which we call the Climate and Environment Roadmap. So this document highlights 28 decarbonization solutions across 5 key areas. We also modeled the expected impact of these solutions to ensure that if implemented completely and correctly, they would lead to a 50% reduction in emission by 2030. The roadmap also comes with a whole monitoring framework for tracking the progress through key performance indicators, so included an estimation of the financial costs of implementing the different solutions. So it's quite a complete, you know, like document. If you are interested, we can also share the link to this roadmap, which is available on our website. If you want to consult it, and if you have any question about the roadmap, you can also, of course, reach out, and also, of course, to Zaninka, because again, we were closely accompanied by the Climate Action Accelerator on this. Next slide, please. Thanks. So this one, you can see an overview of the decarbonization trajectory with the main milestone. And for example, like to take a concrete one, we aim to reduce the distance traveled by plane, you know, because like, of course, plane travel is quite emissive. So we have set an objective of a 20% reduction by 2025 and a reduction of 5% by the end of 2030. So taken together, the successful implementation of all these different solutions should lead us towards a global 50% reduction by 2030. Next slide, please. So where are we now? We are currently in the implementation phase. So it's not easy, as you can imagine, because yeah, for a variety of reasons. So first, we need some, you know, like you need some resources, human and financial resources, to implement the solution, and it's quite difficult to fundraise for these resources because it's about internal, you know, transformation, and the donors are usually quite not various to our experience, at least in this area. But there are also, you know, other reasons. For example, I think the implementation of the roadmap is a long-term exercise, and we are not very used to it sometimes within the sector, especially the human sector. So it's not an easy task. So we are still in this implementation phase. We will have the result of our next carbon footprint assessment for the year 2024 in a few weeks, and it will be also a crucial milestone, you know, to evaluate a bit our progress. Through this process, and I won't have time to go into too much detail here, but I think through this process, we have identified 4 key principles that we are trying to, you know, like to follow in all the activities we do internally. So again, I won't go into too much detail, but participation, of course, is key. Participation of the staff in all the steps and the decision-making processes. Localization and partnerships, that's why we are here together. So we really see sustainability as an opportunity also to strengthen local engagement and local action. Awareness raising, very important. It's important to continuously raise awareness within the teams and the communities we work with. And finally, and that's something unfortunately that has not been very developed yet, but I really hope to work much more on this. But I think this is important to mention that there is a strong interconnection between gender and climate change. And of course, it would be great it's important to also include some gender aspect into the climate and sustainability activity. Really quick, I see that I'm already out of time. Sorry for that. Just a few, final takeaways. So again, first of all, no one-size-fits-all solution exists. So our training modules offer guidance, not prescription. And of course, there are plenty of other ways to apprehend to approach this mainstreaming of sustainability within your organization. Second point, I think measuring the impact is important, but action is more important. Goal is to reduce emission and impact, not just to track this impact in a very detailed way. And linked to that also, I think it's important to say that this measurement must not become, like a barrier to act. I think we must also ensure that all the work we are using, like those carbon footprint, decarbonization trajectory, we need to make sure they make sense, that they are inclusive, accessible, and also maybe in other contexts, it doesn't really make sense to use them, and it's fine. I think like it's not less valuable. Other alternative approach are not less valuable than basing yourself like on those very rigid framework, and we must really like take also other approaches into account. And two last points: internal resistance and budget constraint are a real challenge. So especially now, like in the face of the cuts, I think there is a strong risk that environmental initiative being deprioritized. So overcoming this is really important, and it asks for advocacy and leadership support at every level. And finally, collaboration is essential. So the sector is quite small compared to other one. We must work together, share lessons, and collectively advocate for stronger climate action. And again, I hope today is kind of a starting point within the Global Hub community to discuss those topics. So thank you very much. Sorry for being a bit long here. And looking forward to the discussion just right after. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Louis, and no worries. Aaron Tanner is asking in the Q&A to share the climate and environmental roadmap document in the chat. So if you can share a public link, please do that. And we are also going to share this link in the email that we are going to send after the end of the webinar. Okay, thank you so much. Let's move to the next to our next speaker. Please, Deep, switch on your camera now. Our fourth speaker is Deep Purkayastha. He is Director of Project Development Society, and he started with the organization in 1997 to help boys and young men understand gender equality. He works in child safeguarding for children in difficult situations, like those living near railways or those who have broken the law. Today, he leads youth groups in 12 districts that fights against problems like domestic violence, harassment, child marriage, and abuse. He believes children should have more say in decisions about their lives, and his work focuses on getting communities involved, protecting children, and supporting family-based care instead of institutions. And I know that we are going to hear a really interesting presentation from him. So, Deep, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Nico. And I know we are at the fag end of the webinar. So I will be talking about exactly what Nishani mentioned as part of the charter, where one of these principles are about embracing leadership of local actors and communities. And our experience taking the first steps to work around climate change through children is about amplifying community voices so that the community voices are heard. And these are from Sundarbans. This all known as the largest mangrove delta in the world, which straddles both India and Bangladesh. And Like Luis was already mentioning, we are part of one of the projects called SAPA, which means resolve. And I'll be talking about my experiences here. So next slide, please. This is a little bit about Sundarbans. I know a lot of people here might already know about the challenges that the Sundarban areas are facing, but these are mostly about rising sea levels, a repeated number of incidents of cyclones. There was a time when we would actually have maybe one cyclone in 2 years. There are like 3 or 4 cyclonic events every year. There is a lot of salt water intrusion, which is also not only a result of climate change, but I would say a little bit of man-made dams on the rivers, so that the traditional flow of the river Ganges cannot push the salt water back towards the sea. And of course, habitat loss with disappearing islands. Most of these are riverine islands. So a lot of these islands are disappearing under sea because of the rising sea levels, and people have to move. And obviously, there is a huge impact on livelihood. A lot of the areas in the Sundarbans had actually been, the vegetable bit for southern parts of Bengal, the eastern province in India, where you have Sundarbans, and for the city of Kolkata. So, but now all that is gone, and a lot of people therefore have been displaced. There is a lot of climate refugees who are coming into Kolkata and other cities of India. Of course, there is a lot of food insecurity, because you sometimes don't even, there are years where you cannot really cultivate the land at all. And I really don't have to emphasize the fact that whenever there is this sort of insecurity happening, there are gender vulnerabilities that have happened, families become unstable. But in the Sundarbans, there is a specific issue about child abandonment. A lot of families actually migrate. The parents migrate. There are more men than women, but there is a substantial amount of women who migrate, and the children are left to themselves or to their grandparents. And sometimes parents don't come back. Children are abandoned. Children run away. There is a huge amount of trafficking. Sundarbans have become one of the major hubs for child trafficking in India because of this abandonment. And of course, as you realize, because of frequent disasters, there's a lot of disruption in education, not only in terms of the educational curriculum, but because schools are used for shelters for children and the communities. So schools cannot function for long times. There is a lot of issues around healthcare, and of course around protection services, as I was talking about abandonment, because these are lots of riverine islands which are really, really difficult to approach. And so the protection services sometimes cannot reach out to children. Next slide, please. But our strategy, as I said, has been to collectivize adolescents, because not only because we believe that the adolescents' voice will have to be heard in terms of climate action, but also because of this huge amount of migration from Sundarban areas. The real actors, the real persons who really face a lot of problems there are the adolescents themselves. So there are formations of youth collectives where collectives come together every week to discuss different issues. We use sport. Traditionally, like kabaddi is used to get a lot of girls onto the playing field so they can start claiming public spaces. And the youth collectives actually are engaged in a lot of climate change raising issues. There are disaster drills that they are part of, and there is also local action around climate that they undertake, which includes things like risk assessments and mapping safe zones, and building their own skills around first aid and evacuation. But I think the most important fact is linking these collectives to larger statewide networks of collectives. And this is something that there's been a learning for children there, because they come from very remote areas. They have consistently said that even to have power in their local communities, they need to have affiliation with networks at the larger country and provincial level. and that affiliation seems to actually, in a sense, strengthen their voices to influence their own communities. So this is something very important, where these collectives also take a lot of power from their affiliations to larger networks outside. Next slide, please. One of the, of course, hubs that we are trying to build on is as part of the community. You know how schools actually can be, the heartbeat of the communities, especially in these areas. In a traditional society like in India, school teachers are often looked up as influencers, and the schools often have enjoy a sort of moral authority, especially when it comes to activating for any transformative change. So a school has been built into hubs. There's a lot of work that is happening with teachers, where there's children and their parents are being trained on disaster risk reduction, on emergency shelters. Schools are at community resource centers for climate education and disaster relief coordination when such a thing happens. And also very important is that this the project that we are working on also is at the moment at the cusp of actually introducing and revising the school syllabus for children to include climate change as a very important and continuing content in their science and geography curriculum. So that is something that has been a lot informed by the children from those areas. Of course, the school helps in building a local core of youth volunteers. So whenever there's a humanitarian response to a disaster, sometimes we often feel that there are not enough people in those communities who can also help us and may have these linked together, so that it is faster for us to reach out to people. So here we are also looking at a local core group of youth volunteers who will also link up with humanitarian aid agencies. So that is something how the school also becomes a center of around which collectivization of adolescence is happening. Next slide, please. So obviously the impact on the community, we hope, will be of increased community resilience. As somebody mentioned also while this webinar was on, because there are a lot of people who are aged in these communities. So we will have to look at how resilient people who are senior citizens in those areas, as well as adolescents, that can be raised. We firmly believe that stronger youth leadership will actually help bring about changes in perspectives. There will be changes in awareness and also influence on the local government. As we said, that we will need to really scale up the existing networks and ally them with the other regional networks, so that there is more policy advocacy that can happen. Something very important I need to mention here is that for the first time, we are also revising the disaster management policy of the government, including not only trying to look at how children's voices are reflected, but also looking at a very, very special category, children with disabilities, and not just children, but persons with disabilities, absolutely missing in our disaster management policies. So trying to introduce the fact that we have to have vision around that. We are also trying to look at just energy transition, because over the 15 years, there's going to be, India will be moving away slowly from coal and fossil fuel-based energies to more renewable energies. How in the Sundarban areas can this be done and without affecting the environment? And also, one of the future directions is that many of these communities in India, the forest communities in India, have a very hoary, long cultural tradition of living in the forests. How often, we have not really looked at how local cultures can bring about change. So also harvesting local cultures to bring about change there. Thank you so much, Eniko.
Okay, thank you so much, Deep. It's really, really interesting and saddening at the same time that climate change can cause such a havoc in the lives of people. I think now it's time for the Q&A session. So please, everybody, turn your screens on, and we can move to these questions that we have some questions already in the Q&A section, and one we already answered, but I wanted to ask you directly as well. Niha, can you please also switch on your camera if possible? Thank you. Yes. So Zahid Memon from NGO asked that can speakers share their email for upcoming resources support like supporting proposal development or on climate change adaptation grants, please. So also, sorry, this is, I think, a question addressed to Nishani for sure, I know, but to everyone, are you open to help the organizations, advise them in climate change and advise them in proposal development, or you don't have this kind of resources?
Hi, thanks for the question. And thanks, Eniko, for sharing the link of the webinar. So what we support organizations to do is to look at their development a lot, mostly on target development and their policy, if they don't have a policy, how do you support them to develop a policies? How do you look at what is already existing within their organizations? Because there's a lot already going on, as we see and as we hear from Deep and from Zaninha of their partners, and Louise from your partners. There's a lot of action happening already in an organization. What we support is to take some of that action and see what can be improved, where are the gaps that you're not actually looking at, and the charter acts as a really good framework to see what's already being done, how can it be more systemized, how can it be more mainstreamed. And one of the web having on the 13th of March is on looking at mainstreaming and funding for disaster risk reduction programs in the humanitarian context. So Eniko shared the link with you. There's also quite a few other coming webinars, events on mainstreaming, lessons learned, case studies coming up. So please do keep an eye on it. I will share the link on the chat for everyone to see. And if you do have proposals, it also depends on we can support you in some way. We're not really done that at the moment, but if there is any proposals that you are developing and you need an eye on it so that we make sure the proper jargon's being, perhaps, that is what it is, right? We can look at how we can support you. Not a full promise, but we can try and support you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And Zaninha, I was when you had your presentation that you are working with a lot of organizations, but if a local organization, let's say, has a climate change related project and would like to partner with you with Climate Action Accelerator, how can they do that? How can they reach out to you?
You mean if they have a project already in place? Or if
they are thinking of doing some project, yes.
Yeah, I think I can share my email or our contact email, but because what we do is like launch specific support programs and specific, like we normally collect or gather multiple organizations together, but we do have many organizations contact us, and we have meetings with them specifically, and then see how we can craft together a program or a project. So I would say, yeah, if for those that are interested, for sure to let us know, and then it really depends on our capacity to raise funds to develop a project, and then support organizations, especially because the support program we developed for national and local organization is free at charge financially for them, so we didn't have to raise funds in order to be able to do that. but we do kind of keep a list of organizations that have been interested, and then when we're able to launch something, we go ahead with those. So I can share my email, and for those that are interested by the conversation,
Yes.
for sure they can reach out.
Okay, thank you so much. We can send it out after the webinar. So thank you so much for your help. Louis, do you want to add something to this question, or shall I go to the questions that we already have in the question and answer section? We have 9 questions there. Shall I go, Louis?
Yeah, you can like just to maybe highlight like the importance of also like events and webinars such as the one that Nishani also just shared with us on the funding aspect, because of course, like as I mentioned, I think it's a very important point, because obviously, like it's good to develop like an action plan and everything, but you need some resources to implement it. So the funding, the aspect is really crucial. I know also, and I don't want to put link on the spot here, but I know that the Climate Action Accelerator also does quite a lot of engagement with donors. Like there are lists also of donors related to like funding of internal transformation of organization towards a more sustainable model. And I know also that they do a lot of advocacy on this. And yes, this is to be frank, for like down like until now, I mean, we've been trying at Terdesum also to identify some opportunities really like to finance this transformation, and it's tough. I mean, like most of a lot of donors are not really maybe ready yet to contribute. So yeah, all that to say that it's also a big part of the discussion, how to engage with the donors, and how also can we maybe think about like alternative funding streams and so on, So yeah, just wanted to add that. Right. Yeah.
And because we have a question related to funding and it's addressed to DEEP, I will start with that question from the Q&A section. As a representative of the Indian local civil society, how do you see the short-term future of your work given the current funding climate? And do you think the Indian state will to sustain the efforts you have started? And if not, what resources are you thinking of mobilizing to reach your goals?
I think this is very crucial for a lot that we do. The Indian civil society sector, I actually come from the child rights sector, which is trying to incorporate climate change issues because it actually is affecting children. You must be aware that the controversies about funding that Indian civil society organizations are facing at the moment. There are risks in trying to say that we want to try and influence policy. However, I'm not. I think we are looking at a little bleaker situation than before, and of course, a large way in which we can actually in ourselves is to align ourselves with local government and urban and rural local bodies, which is quite strong in India, and also has untied funds available with them. Then it's very important that we also bring them on board. My personal experience of working here has been, when we really talk about the Indian state, is that more than that, the elected representatives are more responsive to what NGOs and civil society organizations have to say. And I think that is something that a lot of us NGOs will need to invest in India. We have kept the political, establishment sort of, further away from us in many ways. But I think we need to have more with them at the level so that existing government funds are available at the local level. But we are also, let's say, hopeful that corporate social responsibility funding should come into the sector, because India, as the government, as the state of India, has already taken up huge goals around renewable sources of energy, around responding to climate change, especially around solar energy issues. So I'm keeping my fingers crossed. Though, thank you for your concern, because the short term is bleak at the moment. But I guess we will have to change our strategies and also our perspectives to see how local funds can be mobilized.
Okay, thank you. Yes, we are what you are saying, the short term, if the short term bleak, so hopefully this will resolve somehow the situation in the longer term. Coming to the questions from the Q&A section, Matthew Brubacher, his question is, I think, mostly directed to Louis, but to all of you as well. Can you identify your recommendation for tools to developing a carbon footprint? We used an external consultancy for the first, but are unable to continue financing this year to year.
Yeah, thanks for the questions. So again, like the third module of the e-learning is specifically on carbon footprint, and here, like, we also share some ideas and tools that can be used. Yeah, I think, like, kind of the most used, to my knowledge, for now, like, is the Humanitarian Carbon Calculator. You know, that it's a tool that was developed recently, and we present this tool in the e-learning module, and I think it's accessible from the Climate Charter website, actually, this tool. So it can be a good option, because it was also specifically developed for the sector. So yeah, that would be my answer. But like, I don't have like a complete overview of all the existing. So yeah, there are multiple methodologies out there, and yeah, I think in terms of the external consultancy, it's also a step that we had to take for our first carbon footprint. So a lot of organizations rely on external consultant, at least for the first carbon assessment exercise. But it's true that it's a costly consultancy. So of course, if you can internalize this process by using some of the tools that were designed for the sector, it can be interesting also for your organization. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much. We have a question, I think it's addressed to one in the panel. It's from Hari Subedi, and says, how can we support local government to develop their policy and mobilize their networks strength to work on climate change adaptation and environment sustainability? I think it's a bit broad question, but do you have any thoughts on this issue? Who would like to? Zaninha?
Yeah, I can maybe answer quickly, but I think I think it's going to be very specific depending on obviously the and the way local governments work in different places. I can only speak for West Africa, where we've seen our local partners who, and I'm not sure how similar this is in Asia or other places, who are in West Africa, who are quite close to their local governments. So for example, each of the roadmaps, almost the 5 roadmaps that are validated today, included kind of consultation sessions with the ministries to make sure that they're in line with whatever was the national kind of position or national guidelines on what the government wanted to do. So there was already this existing relationship that they had as, you know, national organizations that provide essential services to population, this relationship. So they were able to, you know, invite the Ministry of Environment to look at the roadmap and endorse it. Or so I think there's this part of like already mobilizing the local government to know what the NGO is doing, for them to be aware of this happening, that the government can support it, that the NGO can support what maybe the local authorities are trying to do and need access to community. So there's, I think, on that element. And I think the other side is about then how these organizations together can provide a platform to a certain degree influence certain things, as much as, I don't know, the NGO sector can do that compared to, I don't know, private. I think there is something that we're seeing where if you bring together multiple NGOs that are doing something similar, bring together a private sector that is kind of coming up to support in general climate action and environmental action, and how this group of us that are going to require or use these services, so how then those two together actually create a really a loud message for authorities. Because we like to say at the accelerator, and I think this is the truth for a lot of things, government action or laws always come last. They come after actors have made it obvious. So, you know, it doesn't, they're not the innovators. I mean, I don't say that in a specific way, but I mean that they do come to support existing work. So I think we're seeing how do you then combine it with private sector movements, with what NGOs are demanding as the demand side, and then creating a unified message that authorities feel like, okay, this is becoming a real demand from people. So I would say that's how we've seen it happening in West Africa, or at least with the NGOs we work with.
Let's see. Deep, do you have? Sorry, Nishani, go ahead.
Thanks. I just wanted to share a little bit from the experience of working in Sri Lanka with local government authorities. And it's really interesting because what happens is they're part of actually local community. If you're really looking at supporting and promoting local action, working with local government authorities is very crucial, because they are actually impacted also by climate change, and they're impacted by, you know, everything that we are seeing for communities. They're also part of it. So sometimes when you're really out there responding, trying to get hold of your local government authority focal point is difficult, because they're also displaced, right? So how do we're getting them engaged from the start of programs, from the start of a design, and making them part of it is really crucial. And I think that is what it is about. How do we go to a community and work with every part of that community, from, as Deep mentioned, the children to the youth, the mobilizers, to those who are on the ground, to elderly, to women, to everyone, including local authorities, is crucial to ensure that when disaster hits or before a disaster hits, where preparedness is extremely crucial and important, that they're engaged from the start, so that there is ownership. That ownership is crucial, or else you get nothing done. And that takes time. Trust relationship takes time. So this is where local actors are important, because they know these local authorities. They know it's your network. You've gone to school with them. You know, you either had someone's relative. That's how it works. So I think we're really important to tap into networks and collective action. And really what Zaniha meant is crucial is that local advocacy, right? Collective advocacy is crucial, and that's where civil society is important and to get together and talk to these local authorities and say, listen, we're facing this. How do we make this better? How do we improve this together? Over.
Okay. Deep, do you have some questions regarding?
Yeah, thank you. Just to share certain things, it will not be applicable to other places perhaps, but just to build on what Nishani said, it's very similar in India, where local government is about the local community, and especially people whom you know at a very human scale, and where you can actually have even fights with them to get certain things done. For us in West Bengal, what has happened is that, we have something called the Children's Commission at the state level. This is a statutory body which can actually monitor and pass orders and recommendations of the government's, whatever the government does. And because the members increasingly now civil society organizations, they are actually using that position to actually create guidelines and recommendations to different government bodies and etc., and getting them implemented. For us, this is a window of opportunity. You already have allied people who are allies on a statutory body who have that power, the constitutional power, to actually tell the government this is what you should be doing, this is what you are not doing, this is what needs to be done faster. So that actually happened. And when I was talking about how we are trying to modify the disaster management here, how very quickly the syllabus has been revised, and very very interesting interactive learning methodologies have been introduced. It has largely been due to the commission, and the head happens and it carries with the government. So that often translates back to the local level in many different ways. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. We do have two questions for Aaron. Those are directed to you, Louis, and those are really specific. So because we have like 3 minutes left from our webinar, I would suggest to answer the final question from Novella Jean Galit. And if we can answer those questions in writing, we will send to Aaron personally and to everybody, okay? Thank you. So the last question, and just to respect the time, please answer short, comes from Novella Jean Galit. And as someone who still studies in college, and I'm part of a organization that aims to protect the environment, how are you going to encourage the youth somehow to incorporate disaster risk management while addressing climate change adaptation, knowing we have limited funds and connections? It's a really brilliant question. Who wants to start?
Yeah, I can just say a few words. So thanks a lot for this amazing question. I think it's crucial. So also at RDSM, of course, we are trying to, to engage with and to promote participation. And we see that actually, like most of the time, like what they need is a kind of support, on kind of soft skills that are more to do with developing a project, pitching it to potential donors and so on. So we see that most of the time young people have amazing ideas, and actually often like more ambitious ideas than kind of adults, if we can say so. Yeah, I would say that it's very important to support those initiatives with depending on the needs that can be identified directly by the youth engaged in those initiatives. So that's something we are trying to do. That's something that's not easy, but I think NGOs have also a role to play here in this support function.
Thank you. Someone else want to pitch in or no? Okay, then I think, yeah, okay, I see that's already we are at the end of the webinar, so also I see we have another question from Klim Shabalin. We will answer that question in writing and we will send you after the event. Okay, then thank you everyone for being here at our event. Please my colleague will launch a short survey, and please fill it in before you leave. And until you fill in this short questionnaire, I would like to tell you that our next event will be a webinar on institutional fundraising with Scott Murray, who is also the author of the e-learning institutional fundraising. We will share you the invitation to this webinar in the email that follows this event. This e-learning is going to give you a detailed guide on how to proceed with fundraising from institutions. It has a lot of practical tips, downloadable Excel sheets. I already tried to finish it. It's really long and it's extensive. I think it's the longest e-learning that I have on Local Link Hub, but given the circumstances, I think it's worth your time. Okay, let me see. A lot of you already filled in the survey, but let us wait a bit if we do have some answers coming in. Hope again that you enjoy discussion today. I learned a lot from climate change, about climate change, about local organizations, and about how the local organization networks are really important in sustaining the climate change initiative. Okay, we will end the poll now. Thank you for all the answers. Thank you and see you at our next webinar then. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks a lot.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you.